The Galactic Republic was the government that ruled the galaxy for over 25,000 years until its dissolution and subsequent reformation into the Galactic Empire in 19 BBY, before the Battle of Yavin. Throughout its existence, the state was commonly known as the Republic. In the era following its fall and beyond, it was remembered as the Old Republic. On rare occasions, it was also known as the Old Galactic Republic or the First Galactic Republic. In some contexts, the term Old Order was used to describe the Republic, though this was not in common use. The Republic was a representative democracy composed of numerous star systems, sectors, and member worlds that spanned most of the known galaxy. Its central government was divided into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative power rested with the Galactic Senate, a body formed by elected or appointed representatives. Its main functions included mediating disputes ranging from the planetary to the galactic scale, regulating trade routes between star systems, and, in theory, representing the interests of the Republic's citizens. The office of the Supreme Chancellor constituted the Senate's executive counterpart. The Chancellor was elected from within the ranks of the Senate by its own members. As the leader of the Senate and general representative of the Republic, the Chancellor also held the titles of Head of State and President. The judicial branch was comprised of the Supreme Court and various lower regional courts. The Supreme Court consisted of 12 judges, one of whom served as the Chief Justice. For most of its history as the dominant galactic power, the Republic did not define itself as a strong centralized government, but rather as a union of sovereign planets created for the purposes of collective security and economic prosperity. It was said that its complete history could fill thousands of libraries. The Republic was, in essence, a benevolent government, though deeply ineffective in its final centuries, trapped in countless layers of bureaucracy and hindered by political and corporate corruption. The Galactic Republic, which had existed for at least 25,034 years, was finally brought down by the Sith, who transformed it into the Galactic Empire. The Republic was born with the ratification of the Galactic Constitution in the year 25,053 BBY during the Unification Wars. During this period, humans and Duros reverse-engineered technologies based on the infinite empire of the Rakata, leading to the creation of the first hyperdrive. This breakthrough allowed Coruscant to become the capital of the Galactic Republic. The founding members of the government were mostly humans from the core worlds who were protected from outside influences by a clandestine group known as the Geno Herodin. This organization wished to see the new government flourish and operated in total secrecy, its existence unknown to the galactic population and even to the Jedi Order. Shortly after the formation of the Republic, the Perlium trade route was mapped, linking Coruscant with Ossus and facilitating the incorporation of the Jedi Knights into the Republic. A key world on this route was Munilinst, the source of the Republic's credit, which traded with the native moons who controlled the newly formed intergalactic banking clan. Over the following millennia, the Corellian Run was mapped, connecting Coruscant with Corellia and beyond. The wedge defined by both trade routes came to be known as the Slice. Because galactic hyperspace to the west of Coruscant was riddled with anomalies and impassable for the technology of the time, the Republic's expansion was directed primarily eastward. The portion of core worlds within the Slice was known as the Arrowhead, from which the Republic continued its growth. Although history often remembers the Republic as an era of peace, numerous galactic conflicts marked its existence, among them the 100 Years of Darkness, the Old Sith Wars, the Voltar Cataclysm, the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi Civil War, the New Sith Wars, and finally, the Clone Wars.
Early history. In its beginnings, the government on Coruscant favored slow expansion despite encouraging hyperspace exploration. However, against its own wishes, the Republic's membership grew rapidly during its first millennium of existence, mainly due to worlds seeking protection from the Hutt Empire. By the year 25,000 BBY, Coruscant had officially consolidated itself as a galactic hub. By then, the Hutt Empire had collapsed and transformed into Hutt space. For centuries, the Jedi Knights and the ancient military forces of the Republic defended the government from those who wished to destroy it. Around 24,500 BBY, the First Great Schism occurred, following the creation of the Legions of Leto by fallen Jedi who believed that true power was achieved not through passive meditation, but through emotion. Tension between the Jedi Order and these renegade Jedi, led first by Zendor and after his death by Arden Lin, escalated until it broke out into open conflict.
In 24,000 BBY, the Republic entered the Taiwanese War against the Honorable Union of Decevero and Taiwan. The conflict stretched across the Prelimian route, and both Coruscant and Decevero suffered devastating pressure bombings. Finally, the Republic achieved victory by inciting the Hutts against the Taiwanese. Within a century, most of the Taiwan cluster swore allegiance to Coruscant, with the notable exception of Decevero, which opted to remain independent. During the Great Manifest period between 20,000 and 17,000 BBY, the Republic expanded eastward across the galaxy. Despite this, the slice remained the heart of navigable space. Over time, the Republic extended beyond the northern and southern galactic borders of the slice, although much of the galaxy remained unknown, save for a few outposts like Ord Mantell and Molastar. The space west of Coruscant remained unexplored, as no trade routes comparable to the Prelimian or the Corellian run had been discovered in that direction. Worse still, advancement was limited to dangerous jumps of 1 or 2 light-years through regions plagued by hyperspace anomalies. During this period, the expansion region was formed, which suffered gravely due to attempts by Alsaken to wrestle control of the Republic away from Coruscant. This gave rise to the 17 Alsaken conflicts, which spanned from 17,000 to 3,000 BBY. Most of these clashes took place in the holdings of both powers within the expansion region rather than in the core itself. Generally, Coruscant emerged victorious from almost all conflicts, with the 7th conflict being a notable exception. During this same era, the first Arcanian conflict took place. Arcanian geneticists initiated a series of genetic experiments on other sentient species, most notably the modification of several 6-armed Zexto from Troikan, transforming them into a new species known as the Cormians. In 15,500 BBY, following a disastrous first contact, Coruscant was attacked by star dragons during the Duino-Guan contention. The conflict was resolved peacefully thanks to the intervention of Supreme Chancellor Philorian and the Star Dragon philosopher Bors Mot-O, who jointly founded the University of Coruscant. Sometime before 12,000 BBY, the Galactic Museum was also established on Coruscant. Around 12,000 BBY, Contus Spex I became Supreme Chancellor. He and his descendants belonged to the Pius Dea theocratic cult, which would control the Republic for the next 1,000 years. These fanatical Supreme Chancellors approved a series of crusades against alien species in the Outer Rim. After 11,000 BBY, the cult appears to have dissolved violently. The tensions arising as a consequence of these crusades deepened the rift between the core worlds and the rim worlds, a division that would persist even millennia later. Something similar to the apostasy in Warhammer 40,000. I might make a video about it at another time. Around 9,000 BBY, Blotus the Hutt became Supreme Chancellor and ruled the Galactic Republic for 275 years in the period known as the Rhyanitis period. Unlike most Hutts, Blotus was remembered as a distinguished and just ruler. By 7,308 BBY, the standard galactic calendar had already been corrected and standardized. In 7003 BBY, the Second Great Schism occurred when a group of fallen Jedi discovered a Force technique capable of altering life forms. This event initiated the 100 Years of Darkness, a century marked by the creation of monstrous creatures, among them enormous serpentine leviathans, capable of drawing life energies into blister traps on their backs. At the Battle of Korbos in 6900 BBY, the Jedi crushed the rebellion and exiled these fallen Jedi from known space. However, the exiles discovered Korriban, a desolate world inhabited by the Sith people, a relatively primitive but exceptionally Force-sensitive species. Through their mastery of the Force, the fallen Jedi subjugated the Sith and rose to near godlike status on the nearby world of Zeost, becoming the rulers of the species. With the passage of time and interbreeding between the fallen Jedi and the Sith, the term Sith came to designate not only the original inhabitants of Korriban and Zeost, but also their renegade Jedi masters. In 5000 BBY, the Jedi and the ancient Sith Empire clashed in the Great Hyperspace War. Many worlds were scarred forever by this conflict, but the Jedi managed to repel the invaders. As a consequence, the Republic granted the Jedi Order land over a powerful Force nexus, a sacred mountain on Coruscant, upon which the Jedi Temple was built. Although the Sith were defeated that same year, they were not completely destroyed. In 4250 BBY, the Third Great Schism occurred, involving direct combat on Coruscant. The surviving Dark Jedi fled to the Voltar system, where they discovered ancient technology revealing that the system's worlds were artificial constructs, likely created by the mysterious Celestials, the same beings who had built the Corellan system. These Dark Jedi took control of said machines, including the Cosmic Turbine, but were unable to master them, causing the total destruction of the system during the Voltar Cataclysm. Around 4000 BBY, 4 Jedi Masters established the ziggurat of the Jedi Temple over the Force Nexus on Coruscant, a structure that would endure for over 4,000 years. In 4015 BBY, Coruscant were shaken by the Great Droid Revolution, led by HK-01, who was ultimately defeated by Arca Jeth and the Jedi. During this conflict, Arca Jeth discovered techniques to disable machines through the direct use of the Force. Following these events, the Sith Wars began in 4000 BBY, conflicts that nearly destroyed the Republic completely. During the Great Sith War, which lasted 4 years, the Sith Lords Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, along with their Krath and Mandalorian allies, waged a devastating war against the Republic. The conflict ended with their defeat at the hands of Republican forces and the Jedi Order. Subsequently, the cleansing of the 9 houses took place, and later the Great Hunt, which spanned from 3995 to 3993 BBY. These events were followed by the Mandalorian Wars, which unfolded between 3976 and 3960 BBY. The Republic faced off against Mandalorian forces seeking to expand their colonies beyond the Outer Rim territories. These wars served as a prelude to the even more devastating Jedi Civil War, fought between 3959 and 3956 BBY. The Jedi Civil War, also known as the War of the Starforge, pitted the Republic against the Sith Empire of Darth Revan and Darth Malak. It was possibly the most destructive conflict of the entire era, with numerous worlds, including Terrace, Dantooine, and Telos IV, devastated by the Sith fleet. Following the war, Sith remnants fought amongst themselves, exterminated surviving Jedi, and maintained a secret war against the Republic until the Battle of Malachor, which took place between 3956 and 3951 BBY. A year later, the Sith Civil War came to an end, marking the close of the old Sith Wars era. Sometime later, a lone survivor on Korriban would lay the foundations for the rule of two by taking a Sith apprentice. In 3900 BBY, Queen Elsinore Dentasia of the core world Grismalt sponsored an exploration fleet composed of 3 ships, Beneficent Tasia, Constant, and Mother Vima. This fleet, led by Republic explorer Quilon, would discover the planet Naboo. From 3970 to 3670 BBY, the Khans disorders took place in the Khan sector. During this period, Provisional Governor Muriel of Argasta seceded from the Republic and established a military regime throughout the sector. In the ensuing conflict, her forces invaded numerous planets that resisted her rule, including Lord, subjugating their populations and, in many cases, enslaving their inhabitants, especially the Lordians. The enslaved Lordians were forbidden from communicating with one another. Consequently, they were forced to develop a sophisticated system of subtle gestures, facial expressions, and body postures to communicate in secret. This form of nonverbal communication continued to be used even 4 millennia later. After 3 centuries of conflict and the loss of over 5 billion lives, including approximately 500 million Lordians, the Khans disorders finally came to an end when the joint forces of the Jedi and the Republic overthrew the regime in 3670 BBY. In 3700 BBY, the pioneer and Brentau 4th native, Freya Kalea, discovered the Hydean Way, a hyperspace route that stretched along the galaxy's north-south axis. This finding allowed the Republic to expand beyond the slice toward the mid-rim and outer rim worlds, and further led to the discovery of new hyperspace routes, including the Corellian trade spine, initiating the second wave of expansion.
In 3681 BBY, the Sith Empire returned to wage war against the Republic in the Great Galactic War. This conflict greatly weakened the Republic and culminated in the sacking of Coruscant and the signing of the Treaty of Coruscant in 3653 BBY. The treaty imposed harsh conditions on the Republic, triggering a deep economic depression that slowed reconstruction and paralyzed efforts to restore peace. The treaty also forced the Republic to abandon many of its allies, even long-standing ones like the Bothans, and to cede control of numerous planets to the Sith Empire, including Balmorra. As a result of the war and a clearly unfavorable treaty, numerous star systems began to withdraw from the Republic. The Mantellian separatist movement took control of Ord Mantell, initiating the Separatist War, while Alderaan seceded completely, starting the Alderaan Civil War. The Republic was plunged into a supply crisis, with chaos on the streets of Coruscant and a paralyzed Senate. Amid the confusion, the Senate blamed the Jedi for the war and the current situation, sparking a serious dispute with the Order. As a result, the Jedi abandoned Coruscant and relocated to their ancestral homeworld, Tython. Following these events, a period of Cold War began, which lasted for 11 years. In 3642 BBY, a new galactic war broke out, which began to conclude around 3638 BBY with a temporary truce between the Sith Empire and the Galactic Republic during the resurgence of the Revanites led by Revan. The conflict definitively ended in 3636 BBY with the conquest of the Eternal Empire, to which both the Republic and the Sith Empire were forced to submit and pay enormous tributes in resources. Both powers were finally liberated following the defeat of the Eternal Empire at the hands of the Outlander and their Eternal Alliance. Shortly thereafter, tensions between the Republic and the Sith Empire resurfaced during the conflict on Eo-Kath, and later escalated into open war following the Empire's assault on the Jedi colony on Ossus. In 3000 BBY, the 17th Alsacan conflict concluded with the definitive defeat of Alsacan and the introduction of the Invincible-class dreadnought into the Republic fleet. In 2000 BBY, the Republic once again faced the Sith threat with the rise of the new Sith. On this occasion, the Jedi took the vanguard of the conflict.
The war dragged on for centuries until the Battle of Mizra in 1466 BBY, one of the greatest Sith victories of the conflict. The losses suffered by the Republic were so devastating that a dark age began, marked by profound social unrest and an unprecedented economic collapse. The Republic was reduced to a rump state, limited mainly to the core worlds, the inner colonies, and a few isolated systems, while the Sith Empire dominated practically the rest of the galaxy. In this crisis, the Jedi assumed absolute authority, directly governing what remained of the Republic. The Senate was relegated, and effective power passed into the hands of the Jedi Order, while the Republican armed forces were absorbed by the Jedi Army of Light. After nearly 500 years of continuous war, the Army of Light managed to push the Sith back to the planet Ruusan, where they were finally defeated in 1000 BBY during the 7th Battle of Ruusan. However, almost all Army of Light forces present on the planet also perished. The sole surviving Sith, Darth Bane, then instituted the Rule of Two, establishing that only one Sith Master and one apprentice would exist at a time. This tradition continued in secret for the next millennium, while the Sith patiently awaited the right moment to destroy the Jedi. Following the battle, Chancellor Tarsus Valorum enacted the Ruusan Reformation, returning power to the Senate, placing the Jedi under the authority of the Republic government and dissolving the vast majority of the remaining armed forces. Finally, after countless wars, peace and prosperity returned to the Republic. However, with them came a dangerous complacency. The great armies and fleets were reduced, and the Republic came to rely increasingly on the Jedi to maintain order. Save for isolated conflicts, such as the Stark Hyperspace War and the Battle of Naboo, large-scale war became a distant memory. Nevertheless, remote planets, though theoretically under Republic jurisdiction, rarely had access to the technology common in regions near the core. The Republic, showing little interest in these worlds, did not even map them adequately, nor did it completely classify their flora and fauna. As the Republic became increasingly powerful, many of the bureaucrats and senators running the government became corrupt, complacent, or indifferent. The bureaucracy, which had grown and festered over millennia, stifled any attempt at truly effective governance. Added to this were political patronage and personal agendas, which further hindered administration. As a consequence of the growing collusion between government officials, decadent politicians, and favored power groups, corporations like the Trade Federation and the Techno Union vastly increased their influence, to the point of forming private armies. Given the final outcome of this process, it is highly probable that the Sith not only accelerated it, but deliberately fostered it, or even initiated it from the shadows. In 32 BBY, the senator from Naboo, Palpatine, reported to the Senate that his homeworld was under siege by the Trade Federation. Despite being a full-scale invasion, any attempt to condemn it got trapped in endless bureaucratic procedures. When Queen Amidala, leader of the sovereign system of Naboo, spoke before the Senate to demand immediate action, she also presented, under Palpatine's persuasion, a motion for a vote of no confidence against the Republic's leadership. As a result, Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum was removed from office, and shortly thereafter, Palpatine was elected and named Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. Traditionally, the Supreme Chancellor could only serve 2 four-year terms, but Palpatine remained in power much longer due to the prolonged Separatist crisis, which began on Raxus Prime in 24 BBY. The crisis erupted when numerous star systems and commercial organizations, fed up with corruption and the Republic's constant disinterest in their problems, united to secede from the central government. This dissident bloc came to be called the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Tensions between the Republic and the Separatists finally escalated into open war following the arrival of a Jedi strike team on Geonosis, triggering the First Battle of Geonosis and the start of the Clone Wars in 22 BBY. Given the magnitude of the conflict, the Senate granted Palpatine emergency powers to deal with the Separatist Confederacy via a motion presented by the representative of Naboo, Jar Jar Binks. The Chancellor's first move, widely supported at the time, was the creation of a vast army of clone troopers destined to serve as the Republic's main fighting force. Until then, the Republic had not needed a standing army, as internal conflicts were resolved through the intervention of the Jedi or local navies and militias. However, the Confederacy's access to an immense droid army forced the Republic to create a formal military force to face the threat. In the following years, the Senate conceded increasingly more authority to Palpatine, who became the political commander-in-chief of the war. These measures were justified in the name of galactic security, and over time, the Chancellor ceased to need Senate approval for many of his decisions. Since he commanded the loyalty of a broad senatorial majority, this increase in power was seen as a legitimate means to improve government efficiency in wartime. To the citizens of the galaxy, who had long lost faith in a corrupt and ineffective republic, Palpatine began to be perceived as their protector against the droid armies and their fearsome commander, General Grievous. Tension between Chancellor Palpatine and the Jedi Order grew as the Jedi Council became increasingly wary of his growing thirst for power. While Palpatine accumulated authority through successive emergency powers, the Council began to suspect his true intentions and to condemn the Republic's gradual slide toward autocracy, especially at the expense of the Senate, the only governmental body the Order was legally bound to serve.
With the help of Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi Council discovered that Palpatine was in reality the elusive Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith. Upon this revelation, they conspired to arrest the Republic's own head of state. However, the Jedi coup attempt failed when Palpatine assassinated the 4 Jedi Masters, among them Mace Windu, who tried to stop him. He then declared all Jedi enemies of the Republic, accusing them of treason and of attempting to usurp power. The Senate, manipulated and fearful, backed his words. Through the execution of Order 66, Palpatine fulfilled the dream long yearned for by the Sith, the destruction of the Jedi Order. Without warning, the clone troopers of the Grand Army of the Republic betrayed and murdered the vast majority of their Jedi generals. When the Clone Wars concluded with the start of the Great Jedi Purge in 19 BBY, Palpatine appeared before the Senate and proclaimed the rise of a new order, announcing the immediate transformation of the Republic into the Galactic Empire. Grotesquely disfigured following the alleged attempt on his life, Palpatine proclaimed himself Emperor of the Galaxy, thus formalizing what the office of Supreme Chancellor had already become in practice, an absolute dictatorship. Deceived by his charisma, his rhetoric, and the influence of his dark side powers, the majority of the Senate received him with thunderous applause. Shortly after, industries were nationalized, and the Republic was officially replaced by an authoritarian imperial regime. After more than 25,000 years of existence, the Galactic Republic ceased to exist. Only a reduced and powerless imperial Senate remained as the last vestige of the old galactic government. 2 decades after the rise of the Empire, said Senate was nothing more than an ineffective advisory body, tolerated by Palpatine until his power was sufficiently consolidated to rule without the heavy bureaucracy. With the destruction of the last remnant of the old Republic at the hands of the very man it had supported, the Senate's responsibilities were transferred to the Moths and regional governors, all authorized to rule their territories in the name of the Emperor. Barely a year after the start of Emperor Palpatine's reign, the precursor state to the Empire came to be known as the Old Republic, mainly to emphasize the various justifications behind the fall of the Republic and the creation of the Empire. Although the Emperor focused much of his rule on the gradual elimination of all remaining symbols that reminded the imperial population of their democratic past and heritage, the long history and cherished principles of the Old Republic were secretly valued by a growing number of imperial citizens who began to grow disillusioned with the Empire due to the oppressive measures Palpatine enacted to further strengthen his control over the galaxy.
By 2 BBY, the emperor's tyranny motivated various dissidents within the imperial senate to create the Alliance to Restore the Republic, thus initiating the Galactic Civil War. 2 years later, in response to the insurrection, the Empire abolished the Senate, which had already officially left the rebellion to constitute itself as a government separate from the Empire. 4 years later, with the death of Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader at the climactic Battle of Endor, the rebellion achieved victory, while the Empire descended into chaos and disorder. In the following weeks, the rebellion fought in the Bakura incident, and following that conflict, the Alliance to Restore the Republic reorganized itself as the Alliance of Free Planets. A month later, this new alliance fought in the Nagai-Toph War, and after that confrontation, reorganized again, giving rise to the New Republic. In 6.5 ABY, after the Battle of Yavin, the New Republic took Coruscant twice from local imperial factions, thus officially reclaiming authority over the galaxy. In 11 ABY, the new Jedi Order was created at the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4. Following the Imperial reunification in 12 ABY, the Imperial Civil War came to an end, and the remaining Imperial factions reorganized into the Imperial Remnant. Finally, in 19 ABY, the New Republic and the Imperial Remnant signed a peace treaty that ended the Galactic Civil War, 15 years after the Battle of Endor. The memory of the Old Republic, along with many of its ideals, endured even after the New Republic reorganized into the Galactic Alliance, in the wake of the 4-year war against the extragalactic Yuuzhan Vong, who briefly managed to seize the galaxy. In 44 ABY, following the War of the Lost Tribe, the Imperial Remnant reorganized into the Fel Empire, and approximately a month later, the Second Galactic Cold War began, this time between the restored Galactic Empire and the Galactic Alliance. In 127 ABY, the truce between the Imperials and the Alliance broke, when the Sith emerged from hiding and declared war on the galaxy, significantly increasing the influence of the Fel Empire. By 130 ABY, the Fel Empire had finally seized the galaxy, and the 3-year war had concluded. However, their dominance was short-lived. Barely a few months later, the resurgent empire was overthrown by the Sith in a coup d'état, renaming it the Galactic Empire of Darth Krayt. This event split the former government into the Empire in Exile and the Galactic Alliance Remnant, initiating the Second Imperial Civil War and the Third Jedi Purge. In 138 ABY, Darth Krayt's Galactic Empire was defeated by an alliance formed by the Galactic Alliance Remnant, the Empire in Exile, and the fragmented New Jedi Order, leading to the creation of a new democratic government known as the Galactic Federation Triumvirate. In 139 ABY, the Triumvirate definitively defeated the Sith, although their secular allies continued to fight against it for over a year, finally surrendering in 140 ABY. Following the end of these conflicts, the galaxy entered a new era of peace and unity, until Disney came along and ruined everything. The Republic began as an economic and mutual protection alliance among various planets in the galactic core. The Republic's greatest flaw was its lack of a solid formal organization. Much of its operation relied on non-binding constitutional conventions, which corrupt and power-hungry politicians often ignored and undermined more than they respected. Coalition governments were common, with special interests defining the legislative agenda. In the Republic's final years, the Senate became so ineffective that many corporations with political connections and informal blocs of ideologically aligned planets could, in practice, do whatever they wanted. Corrupt government bodies even allowed certain entities, such as the Trade Federation, to build de facto sovereign military forces on a massive scale. However, the final years of the Republic were marked by corruption and profound social injustice. The Senate was divided between those who genuinely wished to defend Republican values and ideals and those who sought to promote their own interests. Following a succession of weak and ineffective chancellors and a crisis provoked by the Trade Federation's invasion of the planet Naboo, stemming from a tariff approved by the Senate itself, the need for strong leadership to end the corruption became evident. Within the government, much of the bureaucracy was under the supervision of the Office of General Ministry. This body encompassed the ministries of State, Intelligence, Commerce, Defense, Education, Finance, Licenses and Permits, Public Information, Science and Security and Intelligence, Interior Security, and Science and Education. Each member state or system government sent a representative or senator to a central legislative body, the Galactic Senate. Senators acted as ambassadors for their homeworlds, and member planets were allowed to maintain their own forms of government and social organization in accordance with their local beliefs, customs, and traditions. There was a wide variety of governments across the political spectrum, from monarchies to republics and hive-mind communes. In some systems, the senator was elected. In others, the planetary government appointed them directly. The monarch of Naboo appointed their senators, while the High Council of Alderaan chose theirs from within their own ranks, usually the heir to the royal house of Organa, who also typically served as the leader of the council. As the power and influence of the Republic expanded, new regions of the galaxy were incorporated into its structure. A reorganization of senatorial representation took place in 1000 BBY during the Ruusan Reformation. The most common organization for these new territories consisted of grouping regions into sectors of approximately 50 inhabited worlds. Each sector was represented by a senatorial delegation. When the number of senators became excessive, the sectors were reorganized into around 1,000 regions, each with its own delegation in the Senate. The Senate was headquartered in a massive building composed of numerous floating platforms, each housing several senators. Each platform represented a sector of the galaxy, with one senator for each planet in that sector. Some platforms represented individual worlds, while others corresponded to powerful corporations and guilds, such as the Trade Federation. In addition to the senators, the leaders of member planets also held voting rights and could introduce legislation. The Senate followed formal parliamentary rules, such as the vote of no confidence, used by Queen Amidala of Naboo to force the removal of Chancellor Finis Valorum in 32 BBY. Senators cast their votes on both procedural and substantive matters. The Chancellor was elected from within the Senate itself. In turn, the Assembly was divided into committees specializing in specific areas of government administration, responsible for drafting legislation that was later reviewed by the full Assembly. Although laws passed by the Senate were binding on all member worlds, most day-to-day legislation affecting citizens was crafted at the planetary, sectoral, or regional level. Therefore, the Senate's primary functions were to mediate disputes between its members, provide for common defense, and regulate interstellar trade. The members of the Senate elected a supreme chancellor from among their ranks, who served as the Republic's head of government and, by default, as head of state and chief diplomatic representative. During the final years of the Republic, especially after the Ruusan Reformation, the office was largely symbolic. The chancellor acted primarily as an arbiter of parliamentary procedure and as primus inter pares, first among equals, within the Senate. Nevertheless, they retained the authority to convene extraordinary sessions and could invoke the chancellor's prerogative to bypass minor aspects of parliamentary procedure. They also presided over the senatorial council. Despite its limitations, the position remained highly prestigious. The chancellor had extensive offices in both the Chancellery of the Senate Rotunda and the Senate Office Building located in Galactic City.
They were formally addressed as Your Excellency. The symbol of the office, shared with the Galactic Senate, was a fanned spear, prominently engraved on the central podium of the main chamber. During sessions, the Chancellor typically wore robes of Veda cloth. The term lasted 4 standard years, with a legal limit of 2 consecutive terms. The power of the office increased drastically during the tenure of Chancellor Palpatine, who convinced the Senate to grant him sweeping emergency powers due to the Separatist crisis and subsequently the Clone Wars. This included an unconstitutional extension of his term after 24 BCY, as well as authority as Commander-in-Chief of the new clone army. The Sector Governance Decree allowed him to appoint military governors on all Republic planets, and the amendment to the Security Act granted him total control over the Jedi Order and the armed forces, eliminating prior oversight by the Senate and the Jedi themselves. Finally, Palpatine proclaimed himself Galactic Emperor, abolished the office of Chancellor, and transformed the Galactic Republic into the Galactic Empire. The position was not restored by the New Republic, which opted to designate its executive leader as Chief of State. Ironically, Palpatine's 13 years as Chancellor, coupled with his imperial reign, forever tainted a position that had previously been a symbol of virtue and stability in the Old Republic, rendering it too controversial to be revived.
The Supreme Court was the highest court of justice in the Old Republic and constituted the judicial branch of the Republican government. Its headquarters were located in the Galactic Courts of Justice building on Coruscant. The court was composed of 12 judges, each holding the title of Justice. One of them served as Chief Justice, presiding over both the Supreme Court and the judicial branch as a whole. Apparently, the Supreme Chancellor could influence appointments to the court in some way, at least during Palpatine's tenure, likely through the nomination system. In addition to acting as a court of last resort and a guarantor of constitutional legality, the Supreme Court also tried cases involving the Republic's most influential politicians and prominent public figures. However, specific matters, including trials of senators for treason, were managed directly by the Galactic Senate. When the Galactic Republic was formed in 25,053 BBY, the Jedi Order had already existed for several centuries on the planet Tython. Within the first century following the Republic's founding, the Order pledged its support to the new government and consequently became formally answerable to the Galactic Senate. Despite this institutional loyalty, the Order always enjoyed a high degree of autonomy to act according to its own judgment, especially regarding its internal affairs. Even so, for thousands of years, the Jedi faithfully served the Senate in multiple roles, whether as special emissaries, peacekeepers, or warriors. Over time, as the Republic expanded its sphere of influence over the known galaxy, the prolonged period of peace and prosperity led to a progressive decay characterized by corruption, stagnation, and complacency, particularly among the elected officials of the Senate. Throughout this process, the Jedi Order remained true to its traditions and principles, often acting as a beacon of honor and integrity within an increasingly amoral and unjust society. The deterioration of the Republican government did not go unnoticed by the Jedi. Many within the Order deeply resented being accountable to an ineffective, bloated, and disorganized system, incapable of facing the problems plaguing the Republic and its citizens. Throughout its extensive history, the Jedi were forced on numerous occasions to intervene on behalf of the Senate to contain internal and external threats to Republican stability. During the new Sith Wars, the Order was even forced to take a more direct approach to governance, going so far as to assume control of the executive office of the Supreme Chancellor due to the Senate's inability to counter the danger the Sith posed to the galaxy. A full millennium would pass before the Jedi considered it safe to return full control of the government to the senators. Following the presumed destruction of the Sith at the Seventh Battle of Ruusan, the Jedi Order enjoyed nearly 1,000 years of relative calm, maintaining peace throughout the Republic without the threat of large-scale galactic war.
Although the demilitarization of the Republic's armed forces placed an even greater burden on the Jedi, they managed to fulfill their responsibilities effectively, ensuring that the Republic's stability was not compromised by the absence of a standing military force. In the twilight of the Republic, relations between the Jedi Order and the Galactic government on Coruscant reached their breaking point. The Senate was dominated by a majority of self-serving delegates, indifferent to the needs of their own people, reducing the few honest senators to an ineffective minority with no real hope of restoring institutional integrity. The Jedi Council became progressively more distrustful of the Senate, to the point of considering no politician worthy of trust. In parallel, the Senate began to lose faith in its ancient protectors. As the separatist crisis intensified and the galaxy neared total fracture, many senators began to doubt the Jedi Order's ability to safeguard both the Republic and its government.
Despite this growing animosity, the Senate did not hesitate to commission the Jedi as officers in the newly created Grand Army of the Republic. During the conflict against the Separatists, the Jedi Order once again acted as the armed wing of the Senate, leading millions of clone troopers and securing countless victories on battlefields scattered across the galaxy. However, even as the Jedi defended the Republican cause and led the army toward final victory, the relationship between the Order and the Senate showed no signs of improvement. Tension peaked when the Jedi Council considered taking control of the Senate, an extreme measure that would only have been necessary if Chancellor Palpatine had to be removed by force. By then, the Council had completely lost faith in the Senate's ability to preserve the Republic's stability during the crisis. Following the failure of the Jedi Council's attempt to arrest Palpatine and publicly expose his identity as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, the Senate wasted no time in discarding its former guardians. The Great Jedi Purge began with Order 66 and Operation Nightfall. With the Jedi Order practically annihilated and the Senate under the covert control of the Sith, Palpatine effortlessly reorganized the Republic into the First Galactic Empire, proclaiming himself Emperor. During the declaration of a new order, the vast majority of the Senate applauded the radical amendments that officially ended a republic with over 25,000 years of history. At the same time, the Empire hunted down and exterminated the Jedi, while the Senate made no attempt to intercede on behalf of the organization that had protected the Republic since its founding. For millennia, the Jedi Order remained loyal to the Galactic Senate, even in moments of greatest institutional corruption, only to be betrayed and abandoned by those they had sworn to serve and protect. After the fall of the Empire and the rise of the New Republic, the reformed Senate recognized the undeniable benefits the Jedi Order had brought to the Old Republic and promoted its restoration. Throughout its history, the Jedi Order had embodied the noblest ideals of the Galactic Republic. Its mere existence allowed the Republic to stand as the pinnacle of galactic civilization, despite a deeply corrupt and inefficient legislature. Without the Jedi, the Republic would have collapsed much sooner under the Senate's dead weight, a fact proven when their near-total extermination allowed Darth Sidious to transform the Republican government into an empire. With the goal of preserving the stability of the nascent New Republic, the Senate recognized the need to ensure the full reconstitution of the Jedi Order. Even after the New Republic reorganized into the Galactic Alliance, a government that resembled the Old Republic in many respects, the Jedi gradually resumed their traditional role as peacekeepers and emissaries of the Senate. By 44 ABY, the relationship between the Jedi Order and the Galactic government was surprisingly similar to that of old, culminating even in another Jedi coup d'etat, which, unlike the previous one, succeeded in overthrowing a tyrannical head of state with the explicit backing of the Senate. The Galactic Republic's influence on the galaxy's economy was closely linked to its regulatory powers, the production of Republic dataries, credits, and the authorization granted to various relevant economic bodies. At the heart of the galactic economy lay planetary trade, While intraplanetary commerce could sustain a local economy, in many cases, the high levels of economic interaction and the enormous scale of exchange required by an advanced society could only be maintained through interplanetary exports. Although some planets kept their own merchant fleets, most relied on large shipping companies, such as Shizor transport systems or independent haulers, to move goods along the major hyperlanes. The corporate sector was first formed in the year 490 BBY, with the goal of freeing both Republic legislators and major corporate revenue generators from their constant disputes. During the final millennia of the Galactic Republic, commercial interests began to organize into guilds to increase their influence over legislation and improve their operational efficiency. Although most of these guilds, such as the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, and the Commerce Guild, collapsed after the Clone Wars, many of their surviving members migrated en masse to the corporate sector authority. Thousands of different currencies circulated throughout the galaxy, but Republic dataries were by far the most widespread currency. Thanks to the Republic's broad membership, dataries were accepted on almost all planets, with the exception of the most remote ones. Since its inception, the credit was backed by the immense wealth of the planet Muna Linst and the Intergalactic Banking Clan, IGBC. During the Clone Wars, the IGBC even went so far as to back the currencies of both sides of the conflict. All workers were required to pay income taxes, which were collected by the Republic Tax Collection Agency. In the final years of the Galactic Republic, a 15% transit tax was also imposed to increase central government revenue.
The Galactic Republic, even with its flaws, and being honest, there were too many flaws, was the only type of government that managed to keep a galaxy united for such a prolonged period. It didn't always succeed, and throughout its history, it was on the brink of destruction on numerous occasions, or at least saw its influence drastically reduced. All of this culminated in the Clone Wars and its definitive fall, giving way to the Galactic Empire. I know I could have talked about what happened afterward in the canon version, but being honest, the contribution it made wasn't particularly significant, at least from my point of view. With that, I'll wrap up the video. I'm glad to be talking about a Star Wars topic again, as in the previous one, focused on the Second Galactic Civil War, I didn't manage to convey the excitement I would have liked. Even so, I'll keep looking for interesting topics for future videos. Thanks for watching until the end. If you like the content, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment on what other topics you'd like to see. If you want to support the channel, I have a Patreon, and channel memberships are also enabled. See you in the next one.